The night begins with silence. Not the gentle quiet of modern streets, but the deep, breathing stillness of a world buried beneath snow. It's the kind of cold that doesn't just touch your skin. It seeps inward, settling in your bones, whispering in your heart. Imagine the medieval countryside, sleeping. Its villages are hidden beneath white blankets and the long shadows of frozen trees. Smoke rises from distant chimneys thin, wavering signals of human defiance against the endless chill. Somewhere inside one of those thatched huts, a family of peasants huddles together, their breath visible in the flickering firelight. This is where the story of survival begins. Not with knights in shining armor or kings in marble halls, but with the quiet strength of ordinary souls who refuse to let winter win. For the medieval peasant, winter wasn't just a season, it was a sentence. Every year, it arrived like an old enemy, testing their patience, their faith, and their endurance. There were no thick wool coats from markets, no glass windows, no iron stoves. Their homes were fragile, built from mud, straw, and hope. The walls wept when it rained. The wind howled through gaps in the timber, and the roof sagged under the weight of the snow. But inside those small cottages, something ancient burned brighter than any royal torch, the will to endure. The peasant's cottage was a masterpiece of necessity. Built by the same hands that worked the fields, its design reflected a perfect balance between poverty and ingenuity. The floors were packed earth, layered with straw to soften the bite of the frost. The walls were wattle and daub-woven sticks, smeared with clay and dung, which became surprisingly warm when dried properly. In the earliest homes, there were no chimneys. The smoke from the central fire escaped through a small hole in the roof, darkening the rafters until they gleamed like tar. This wasn't comfort as we know it, but it was life. The air inside carried a mix of scents: wood smoke, wool, old bread, and the faint sweetness of herbs drying from the beams. When night fell, the darkness came fast and heavy. The sun dipped below the horizon, and the world outside simply vanished into blackness. There were no lanterns, save for the fire's glow and perhaps a tallow candle saved for a special night. Families drew closer then, sharing stories, prayers, and most importantly, warmth. The fire was their heart, and the entire rhythm of their existence revolved around it. It roasted what little food they had, lit their faces with an amber glow, and whispered comfort into the howling void beyond their doors. In those long, icy months, the peasants' greatest skill was adaptation. When the wind grew cruel, they stuffed cracks in the walls with moss and wool. They layered rushes and straw across the floor to trap warmth from their bodies in the fire. The clothing they wore, tunics of coarse wool and cloaks lined with scraps of fur or sheepskin, were passed down for generations, patched so many times that they carried the family's entire history in their stitches. They wrapped their feet in rags before sliding them into simple wooden clogs. Gloves were a luxury most didn't have, but their hands grew accustomed to the cold. It was said that a true peasant could milk a cow in the dead of winter without complaint. The warmth of the animal was enough to thaw even frozen fingers. Yet, beyond all this hardship, there was an odd peace. In the heart of winter, life slowed to a rhythm older than time itself. The fields slept, the tools rested, and the peasants entered a kind of hibernation of the soul. Of course, work still needed doing, animals had to be fed, fires had to be tended, but the furious pace of harvest and planting was gone. This was a time of patience, of stories whispered by the firelight, of songs sung softly while mending clothes. The cold had its own kind of silence, not lifeless, but waiting. It taught them humility, and in that humility they found a deep well of endurance. Sometimes, during the coldest nights, they could hear the distant cry of wolves echoing through the trees, a chilling reminder of how thin the line was between their small world and the vast wilderness. But even that sound became part of the music of winter. In the minds of the peasants, every sound carried meaning: the creak of the roof beams, the hiss of the wind, the distant knock of frozen branches against each other. These weren't noises to fear, but to understand. The world spoke to them constantly, and they had learned to listen. And when hunger pressed hardest, they relied on memory, on the harvests they'd stored in earthen jars, on the herbs dried in the autumn sun, on salted meats hanging from the rafters. On good nights, they shared a warm broth made from bones, leeks, or turnips. On bad nights, they drank water warmed by the fire and dreamed of feasts. But through it all, they never stopped sharing. Even the poorest families would offer what little they could to those who had even less. In that world, generosity wasn't a virtue, it was a strategy for survival. Picture it now, a snowstorm howling outside, the roof rattling, the door creaking on its leather hinges. Inside, a mother hums a tune older than she can remember, her hands weaving wool while her children doze near the fire. The father sits sharpening a small knife, his eyes half closed, the blade catching the flicker of the flame. Every sound feels amplified, the soft breathing of the children, the shifting of straw beneath them, the occasional crack of the hearth. For a moment you realize this is what endurance looks like. Not grand, not heroic, but quiet, steadfast, and full of life. Historians often describe medieval peasants as poor, uneducated, and miserable, but the truth is far deeper. They were engineers of simplicity, poets of survival, and artists of adaptation. Every winter they endured taught them patience and unity. Every morning they woke to frozen fields reminded them that life itself was a miracle renewed daily. Their story isn't written in marble or gold, but in ash and breath, in shared warmth and quiet resilience. They didn't just survive winter. They built a foundation of endurance that still lives in us all. Thanks for watching. If you found this story compelling, please consider liking and subscribing for more journeys into the past. In a world of endless frost and hunger, the humble hearth was more than just a source of heat. It was the beating heart of every peasant home, a tiny, captured sun glowing against the cold that prowled just outside the door. Imagine a time when the fire was hope made visible. Long after the daylight faded, it whispered and crackled in the dark, a storyteller keeping bodies alive and memories warm. To let the fire die was unthinkable. Without it, the night itself became a terrifying enemy. Tending the hearth was a sacred duty, a ritual usually passed to the eldest woman of the house. She was the quiet priestess of the flame. Every morning she would crouch before the gray ashes, coaxing them back to life with a bit of straw and her own breath. Her hands were steady, her patience infinite. That first spark of the day wasn't just a chore. It was like a prayer answered. This wasn't just about survival. It was about continuity, the unbreakable thread that bound generations together. In fact, some families believed the fire carried the very souls of their ancestors, that every flicker was a whisper from the past. Can you imagine waking each day to relight the same fire your great-grandmother once tended? It's a powerful connection to history, right in your own home. And when the wind howled and screamed through the cracks in the walls, the villagers knew their greatest weapon wasn't a sword, but each other. They drew together in clusters, not just families but neighbors too. Communal warmth was their strategy. Entire households would sleep side by side on shared straw mats, pressed close enough to feel the rhythm of each other's breathing. It was often said that you could measure the kindness of a family by the space they made beside their fire. No one was ever turned away, not a weary traveler, not a beggar, not even an enemy if the night was cruel enough. In those moments, survival blurred into compassion. Beyond the warmth of the hearth, the village itself had a pulse, a rhythm that beat in harmony with the frozen season. During the coldest weeks, outdoor work slowed, but life never stopped. Men would trudge into the silent, snow-covered woods to gather firewood or check their traps for rabbits and birds. Inside, women mended clothing, spun wool, and brewed thick, nourishing broths with dried herbs. Children were tasked with fetching buckets of snow to melt for water, or they'd huddle near the fire. their eyes wide, listening to tales of saints, monsters, and miracles. The world outside might have been white and silent, but within those simple mud and timber walls, life hummed with a quiet, determined purpose. Evenings brought a strange kind of peace. After the day's work was done, the entire village seemed to hold its breath. From every chimney, thin ribbons of smoke rose into the low gray sky, blending together. The air carried the scent of burning oak heavy, comforting, and ancient. The church bell would ring just once, its sound echoing across the frostbitten fields, a reminder that even in the coldest dark, faith still kept its vigil. People whispered blessings over their simple bread, crossed themselves before sleep, and held on to the trust that morning would come again. Sometimes, for some, it didn't, but that never stopped them from believing it would. What's truly remarkable is how much beauty they found in such hardship. These peasants didn't just endure the winter, they shaped it into ritual and culture. They sang songs while chopping wood. They told legends about fire spirits who guarded their homes from evil. They wove intricate charms of straw and hung them above their doors to keep frost demons away. And when the storms raged their hardest, they laughed louder, as if their defiance itself could melt the ice. Think about that kind of courage, not the courage of a battlefield, but the courage of everyday life. Would we still find reasons to laugh if the cold was clawing at our bones as it did theirs? At the center of every village, when the snow grew too thick and the nights too long, a single large fire was built in the square. This fire wasn't just for warmth. It was for togetherness. It was their town square, their community center, their theater. Here, elders told stories of the past, of kings long dead and wars half forgotten. Young lovers met by the flickering firelight, their faces glowing. Old friends shared a comfortable silence and steaming cups of ale. The flames painted everyone's faces in gold and shadow, erasing class and age until everyone looked the same, human, fragile, and wonderfully alive. This was their true strength. In a world ruled by distant nobles and warlords, these peasants found power not in wealth or land, but in unity. But even the strongest fires could waver. There were winters so cruel that birds froze mid-flight and fell like stones from the sky. The crops failed, livestock died, and snow piled higher than the rooftops. In those desperate years, desperation bred invention. Peasants learned to line their walls with woven mats of straw or even animal hides for extra insulation. Some dug shallow pits beneath their floors, filling them with stones heated by the fire during the day to release a gentle warmth throughout the night. Others used the simplest trick of all: they slept with their animals. The body heat of a cow or a pig in the same room could mean the difference between waking up and never waking up again. To our modern minds, it might seem crude, but to them, it was sacred, a partnership between creature and human, born of shared breath in a frozen world. And through it all, the fire never truly slept. Even when it dwindled to the faintest single ember, someone always kept watch. Mothers whispered to their children beside it, teaching them patience and reverence. "Feed it gently," they'd say. "It listens," and the children would stare, mesmerized by the orange glow that danced and breathed like a living thing. That glow was their first teacher. It taught them about light, about time, and about hope. Every winter that passed carved lessons into their hearts. That comfort is fragile, that warmth is borrowed, and that life itself is a gift of shared endurance. When spring finally arrived, it wasn't just a change of season, it was a resurrection. The snow melted into rivers that washed away the ashes of hardship, and from that same earth, new green shoots emerged. The same hands that once gathered firewood now planted seeds. And somewhere in every village, a woman would look into her rekindled fire and smile, knowing she had carried her people through another winter. So the next time you light a candle, turn on your heater, or sit by a campfire, take a moment to think of them, the quiet guardians of the flame who turned survival into an art form. Their world was cold, their nights were endless, but their hearts burned with something that no frost could ever extinguish. Maybe that's the truest kind of warmth humanity has ever known. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this glimpse into the past, don't forget to like, subscribe, and join us for more stories. When the first thought came, it was never sudden, not like in stories. It crept in shyly like a guest uncertain if it was welcome. Ice loosened its grip on the riverbanks, and tiny rivulets began to murmur beneath the snow. For months, the peasants had known nothing but gray and silence. Then, one morning, the faintest birdsong pierced the cold. A single note, trembling and pure, echoing across the thatched roofs like a forgotten prayer. And just like that, people began to hope again. In those early days of spring, the village felt almost unreal, a dream struggling to wake. The air still bit at the skin, but it carried a new scent, damp earth, sap, and the faint sweetness of thawing hay. Fields that had lain buried under ice began to show patches of green. The peasants moved through them carefully, as if afraid to break the spell. For them, spring was not just a change in weather. It was proof that the world still remembered them. After surviving the long, merciless winter, everything became sacred. Water dripping from eaves was a blessing. A single surviving chicken was a miracle. And the first sprouts pushing through the soil were proof that the earth, though cruel, had not forgotten how to forgive. Every villager took part in the rebirth. Men repaired fences and sharpened tools dulled by frost. Women swept ashes from the hearth, scrubbing floors until they shone like wet stone. Even the children joined in, running barefoot in the mud, laughing as though laughter itself could chase away the ghosts of winter. But beneath the celebration, there was reverence, a quiet understanding that warmth and life were borrowed, not owned. The peasants knew the cold would return, as it always did, and so they prepared in ways both practical and spiritual. Old rituals stirred to life. They hung garlands of dried herbs above doors to keep sickness away. They lit candles in windows to guide wandering spirits back to peace. Some even buried small pieces of bread at the edge of their fields, offerings to the earth in gratitude for another chance to live. Do you think such rituals were superstition or something deeper, a dialogue between humanity and the elements? It's easy to dismiss them now in our world of switches and thermostats. But to those who lived and died by the moods of the wind, belief was a survival skill. To believe that the earth was listening gave them courage to speak to it. As the days lengthened, warmth became a kind of music. Rivers sang louder, trees whispered secrets through their new leaves, and the villagers, weary but unbroken, found their rhythm again. Markets reopened, filled with laughter and the chatter of barter. Fiddles played in the evenings, and even the poorest family might find cause to dance. It was always something to celebrate: a birth, a wedding, a harvest, promise. And when night fell, people still gathered by the fire, though this time not for survival, but for joy. In those moments, the fire became a storyteller. Shadows on the walls turned into knights, monsters, and gods. Elders spoke of ancient times, of when Rome's legions marched across frozen lands, and of the saints who tamed wolves with prayers. They spoke of distant emperors and golden cities, but the peasants knew their own lives were no less grand. For in their smallness they had endured what even kings could not. Still, the echoes of winter never truly vanished. Every peasant carried a fragment of frost inside them, a reminder that comfort was fleeting, that tomorrow's fire was never guaranteed. That fragility bred humility, but also wisdom. They learned to value warmth not as a luxury, but as connection. To share bread was to share life. To lend a spark of flame was to give hope. And in that giving, they built something greater than any castle, a community bound by shared survival. There was one ancient belief whispered across centuries that captured this truth perfectly. It said that in every fire there lived a spirit, a small guardian of warmth who could bless or curse a household depending on how it was treated. If you fed your fire gently, spoke kindly near it, and shared its heat with others, the spirit would protect your home through the worst storms. But if you grew selfish, hoarded your warmth, or mocked the suffering of others, the spirit would vanish, and with it, your fortune. Whether myth or metaphor, it shaped how people lived. Fire, after all, was life, and life demanded respect. Even now, when historians look back at those centuries, They often marvel not at the castles or cathedrals, but at the resilience of ordinary people, those nameless men and women who faced endless winters without complaint. They didn't write books or carve monuments, but they left behind something stronger, proof that humanity could endure anything so long as it stayed kind. And perhaps that's the truest legacy of the medieval peasant, not the mud huts or wooden plows, but the quiet, unyielding spirit that refused to die, even when the nights were long and the food was gone. Their faith wasn't in miracles or kings, it was in each other, in the warmth of shared hands, in the glow of a single ember kept alive through the cold. So tonight, as you listen to this and the sound of the crackling fire fades into the quiet, think of them. Imagine those distant villages, their smoke curling into the pale dawn. Imagine the laughter echoing through the thawing fields, and the old woman smiling into her rekindled hearth. And ask yourself, would we, in our comfortable, modern world, still have their courage? Could we face a winter with nothing but each other and a flame to keep us alive? Maybe that's the true warmth we've lost, not heat but heart. Because in the end, history is not written by kings, but kept alive by those who never stopped believing in morning. Thank you for watching. If these stories of the past resonate with you, consider subscribing for more journeys into history. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. See you next time.